The dojo was silent, except for the faint hum of a single ceiling fan cutting through the thick, humid air. Every student was focused, yet the tension felt heavier than the sweat dripping down their brows. The polished wooden floor reflected the muted sunlight streaming through high windows, casting long, angular shadows. And then, the atmosphere shifted. He appeared, Bruce Lee. Calm, deliberate, and impossibly focused. His eyes burned with an intensity that seemed to pierce through the very walls. He didn't shout or make an entrance. There was no fanfare, no dramatic music. Just presence, the kind that commands attention without saying a word. Students were practicing their forms, punches slicing through the air, kicks snapping against imaginary opponents, muscles straining with effort. One young fighter, brimming with confidence, smirked and whispered to a friend, "Let's see if he's really all talk." Everyone talks big, but can he actually deliver? Bruce's gaze settled on him. Not a flicker of anger, not a hint of arrogance, just calm observation. And then, like a spark igniting dry wood, the moment came. Bruce moved. Not fast, faster than thought. His body flowed with precision, every motion economical, almost invisible. His fist arced through the air with such speed and clarity that the world seemed to pause for an instant. The target, a wooden training dummy that had survived years of strikes, shattered into splinters with a single, thunderous crack. The sound echoed like a cannon in the small hall. Students froze mid-kick, mid-punch. Their eyes widened, jaws slack, as shards of wood scattered across the floor. The fan's hum seemed suddenly inadequate, drowned out by the sheer force of Bruce's presence. The energy in the room shifted, electric and undeniable. Every breath held, every heartbeat synced to the rhythm of awe. This wasn't just skill. This was power, discipline, and mastery converging in a single perfect moment. No one moved, no one dared speak. Even the seasoned instructors felt a shiver of respect run down their spines. The moment of power had arrived, and in that instant, everyone understood. They were no longer in a room of students practicing martial arts. They were witnessing the living embodiment of Jeet Kune Do, a force of nature whose lessons went far beyond fists and kicks. The air itself seemed charged with anticipation, waiting for the next explosion of brilliance. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in Hong Kong. The sun beat down on the narrow streets outside, but inside the small training hall, the air was thick with anticipation. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting sweat-drenched students moving in disciplined patterns. Wooden floors creaked with every shift of weight, every pivot, every strike. The smell of liniment, leather, and effort hung heavy. Bruce Lee moved through the hall like a shadow made flesh, calm, deliberate, yet impossible to ignore. He didn't speak, didn't draw attention to himself with flamboyant gestures. He simply observed. Every stance, every breath, every subtle twitch of a shoulder or flick of a wrist was noted. He wasn't judging. He was understanding, analyzing the flow of energy in the room, the rhythm of each fighter, and the gaps in their techniques. Students shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Some felt nervous, others inspired. Even the most seasoned fighters sensed something intangible about him, a presence that demanded respect, not through fear, but through pure mastery. He stopped abruptly in front of one particularly cocky young fighter. The boy's chest puffed out, arms loose but ready, eyes gleaming with overconfidence. Bruce leaned slightly forward, his voice low and smooth, yet carrying the weight of certainty. "You think strength comes from force alone," he said. "But real power is in how you adapt, how you flow." The student laughed, a nervous, incredulous sound, and tossed a punch toward Bruce, half mock, half serious. The room tensed. Students paused mid-strike, their eyes following the movement. Bruce didn't move, or at least, it seemed so. Time itself seemed to slow. Then, in the blink of an eye, he intercepted the punch with a flick so subtle, so precise, it felt almost invisible. The boy stumbled back, eyes wide, completely off balance. Bruce didn't shout. He didn't scold. He simply looked at him, calm, unwavering, as though the lesson had already been absorbed without words. The other students gasped collectively. Phones appeared in hands, some recording the scene, some shaking with excitement. Whispers filled the air. This is not just martial arts," one student murmured, awestruck. It's art in motion." Bruce moved among the students again, correcting stances with the gentlest touch. A hand here, a wrist adjusted there, a subtle shift of weight, the smallest corrections producing the most profound results. Each gesture was deliberate, embodying the philosophy of Jeet Kune Do, efficiency, directness, and freedom from rigidity. He paused by the wall, leaning lightly against it, watching silently as students tried to emulate his movements. Sweat dripped down their faces. Muscles ached. Yet even in exhaustion, there was focus. Each student began to understand. Power was not in brute strength, not in showing off, but in discipline, adaptability, and awareness. If you're enjoying this, imagine witnessing it firsthand. The crackle of energy, the awe, the sudden understanding that true martial arts is as much about the mind as it is about the body. If you want more moments like this, where mastery meets philosophy and skill transforms into art, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's honor the spirit of true martial arts together, and make sure the world never forgets the lessons Bruce Lee left behind. The dojo buzzed again, but now with a new energy. Students weren't just practicing, they were learning to feel, to anticipate, to flow. And above it all, Bruce stood, silent, observing, and teaching without ever raising his voice. The dojo, once filled with the steady rhythm of disciplined practice, now trembled with anticipation. Bruce Lee stood at the center, eyes calm yet burning with intensity. His students formed a wide circle around him, some curious, some anxious, all aware that the moment they had been waiting for was arriving. The air felt heavier, charged with the tension of expectation. Absorb what is useful, discard what is not, add what is uniquely your own, Bruce reminded them softly, almost to himself. But his words were more than instruction. They were a philosophy, a way of life distilled into a single, flowing sentence. Every movement he made was an embodiment of that principle. News of his unique style had spread, and a rival dojo had sent their best fighters to challenge him. They whispered among themselves before stepping onto the polished floor. Their faces were confident, even arrogant. "We will see if your so-called Jeet Kune Do can stand against tradition," one sneered. Their punches were sharp, calculated, rehearsed. Their stances rigid, perfectly symmetrical. They had trained for years to anticipate and overpower opponents, but they had never faced someone like Bruce Lee. Bruce didn't answer with words. He didn't taunt or threaten. His body spoke, and in that silence, he became more powerful than any voice. The first strike came, a straight punch aimed at his chest. Bruce shifted like flowing water, his movement seamless and continuous, redirecting the punch without resistance. The opponent's momentum carried him forward, off balance, and Bruce's counter, a flick of the wrist, almost imperceptible, sent him stumbling backward. The circle gasped. Phones emerged in unison, recording every subtle motion, but even the cameras could not capture the fluidity of what had just occurred. Strike after strike followed. Bruce's body moved at a speed that defied prediction. His kicks came from angles no one had considered, weaving around guards and intercepting attacks before they fully formed. Each motion was effortless yet devastating, precise, controlled, and rooted in understanding rather than force. A kick barely grazed one opponent, sending him spinning across the hall like a leaf in a storm. Another fighter's punch connected with air as Bruce flowed around it, his torso twisting with such speed that it was impossible to track. The lesson became clear to everyone present. Rigid technique dies under fluid thought. The opponents, who had trained their lives to anticipate patterns, found themselves lost in Bruce's unpredictability. Every block, every parry, every strike seemed choreographed yet entirely spontaneous. His mastery was not in brute strength or aggression. It was in awareness, reaction, and timing. He moved through the group like water carving a path through stone, adaptable, unyielding, unstoppable. The rivals tried to regain their composure, throwing combinations with increasing force, but each was intercepted, deflected, or dissolved by Bruce's uncanny sense of distance and timing. Sweat dripped from brows, hearts pounded, and the room itself seemed to lean closer, drawn to the rhythm of his movements. Bruce's eyes never left his opponents. There was no hate, no desire to humiliate, only the clarity of understanding. He taught not by speech, but by demonstration, the way power could be softened with flow, aggression tempered by thought, chaos mastered by control. Every student watching felt a mixture of awe and inspiration, realizing that Jeet Kune Do was more than martial arts. It was the embodiment of philosophy in motion. Finally, as the last punch fell short, the rivals stood frozen, humbled, unable to predict or counter the invisible lines of mastery Bruce had drawn. He paused, breathing lightly, muscles relaxed yet alert, the calm eye of a storm at the center of the chaos. His students exhaled collectively, understanding at last what it truly meant to flow, adapt, and harness their own potential. In that charged silence, the dojo learned the most important lesson: true mastery was never about dominating others. It was about mastering oneself, responding without hesitation, and moving in harmony with both mind and body. Bruce Lee's Jeet Kune Do was more than a technique. It was a living philosophy, unfolding with every strike, every motion, every thought in perfect harmony. The dojo was no longer just a room of training students. It had transformed into a theater of awe. The air itself seemed to hum with energy, vibrating with the memory of Bruce Lee's movements. Shattered wooden splinters from the earlier strikes lay scattered on the floor like tiny monuments to the moment, each one a testament to his speed and precision. The students who had doubted his methods, who had questioned whether his Jeet Kune Do could hold up against traditional, disciplined training, now sat in stunned silence. Some knelt instinctively, as if acknowledging an invisible master. Others leaned against the walls, shaking their heads in disbelief, trying to process what they had just witnessed. The sound of shallow, quickened breathing filled the space, a subtle rhythm of awe that made even the creaking floorboards seem alive. A young fighter, one who had once scoffed at Bruce's philosophy, whispered to a friend, his voice trembling with a mixture of fear and admiration, "I've trained for years, and I've never seen anything like this. He moves like the air itself bends to his will." The words hung in the air, barely audible, yet carrying the weight of truth. Bruce paused, taking a long, steady breath. Sweat clung to his skin, glistening under the harsh sunlight streaming through the dojo windows. His chest rose and fell with the calm rhythm of someone in complete control, yet his gaze was alive, scanning the room with quiet intensity. A small, almost imperceptible smile formed on his lips, but it was not the smile of pride. It was the smile of someone who had fulfilled a purpose, the satisfaction of a teacher who had shown, not told. He understood something the students were only beginning to grasp. Real strength was not measured by fear, by dominance, or by how loudly one could assert themselves. True power existed in respect, respect for the art, respect for one's own body and mind, and respect for the people around you. A subtle nod from Bruce could teach more than hours of shouting instructions ever could. Even the rival fighters, those who had entered the dojo full of arrogance and certainty, were humbled. They shuffled their feet, their pride cracked and fragile after Bruce's demonstration. One of them muttered under his breath, almost as if afraid Bruce would hear, "He moves like he's predicting life itself." The words were not exaggeration. They were the astonished confession of someone witnessing mastery that transcended simple technique. Bruce's motions were not just about fighting. They were about understanding, anticipation, and harmony with every element in his environment. Students began to murmur among themselves, recounting each movement, replaying it in their minds like slow-motion film. Every kick, every block, every strike had been executed with flawless timing, with an elegance that seemed to bend reality. They compared notes, trying to dissect the subtle shifts in weight, the fluidity of transition, the way Bruce's gaze anticipated their next move. The dojo, once just a room of practice, had become a sanctuary of enlightenment, a place where philosophy met motion. An older student, who had spent decades mastering traditional forms, stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly. I thought I knew martial arts," he confessed, voice thick with emotion. "But I've never truly understood it until now. Watching him, it's like learning to see the rhythm of life itself." Others nodded in agreement, some silently bowing, acknowledging the depth of what had just occurred. Bruce moved slowly among them, adjusting a posture here, correcting a stance there. Every motion was deliberate, precise, and subtle, a teacher in full command of both his body and the room. He did not scold. He did not criticize. He merely guided, allowing each student to discover the flow within themselves, to feel the rhythm he had imparted without words. The rival fighters lingered near the edges, still wary, still unsure how to confront someone who had redefined the very nature of combat in front of them. And yet, even they began to feel a strange sense of humility and inspiration. Bruce had not sought to humiliate them. He had sought to teach, to awaken understanding. And in that, they could not help but respect him. Finally, the room settled into a tense calm. Students and opponents alike were quiet, each processing the lessons in their own way. There was no applause. There was no cheering. Just the sound of steady breathing, the hum of the ceiling fan, and the quiet, undeniable realization that something extraordinary had taken place. Bruce's gaze lingered on the circle of students, a silent affirmation that they had witnessed more than skill. They had witnessed mastery, philosophy, and the essence of Jeet Kune Do itself. In that moment, the dojo was transformed. A place of ordinary practice had become the site of extraordinary awakening. And as he stepped back, ready to allow them to digest the lesson fully, one student whispered in awe, "He is a living force. Not just a fighter, but a teacher of life." The words floated in the thick air, a perfect reflection of the truth that everyone in the room felt. Bruce Lee had not only demonstrated power, he had revealed its true meaning. The dojo had fallen into a quiet that felt almost sacred. The echoes of punches and kicks, the shattering of wood, and the gasps of awe had faded, leaving only the rhythmic hum of the ceiling fan and the collective heartbeat of those present. Bruce Lee stood in the center, calm and composed, his chest rising and falling with measured breaths. He lifted his hands slowly, as though the very air had weight and meaning. The students, sensing the gravity of the moment, instinctively straightened, their eyes locked on him, every movement frozen in anticipation. "The power you seek," Bruce said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the space, "is not in force but in presence. Not in strikes but in understanding. And not in victory but in discipline." The words hung in the air, sinking into the minds of everyone present. Students whispered to each other, repeating fragments of the statement under their breath, trying to internalize the wisdom embedded in every phrase. Phones were out, cameras recording, fingers flying over screens to share this moment with the world. Comments began flooding live streams and social feeds. "This is Bruce Lee. This is real Jeet Kune Do. He moves like a force of nature." Bruce let his gaze sweep across the room, acknowledging every student, every rival fighter, every observer. There was no pride, no arrogance in his eyes, only purpose. He understood that what he had shown was more than technique. It was a philosophy, a way of seeing the world and moving through it. Each motion he had performed, each counter, each strike, had been a lesson in the subtlety of power and the depth of awareness. A young student, barely able to speak, whispered, I didn't just see martial arts. I felt it. Every strike, every flow, it's like he's teaching life itself." Another student, recording on their phone, nodded vigorously, their hands trembling. This is beyond anything I've ever seen. It's not just skill, it's mastery, philosophy, and presence all at once." The rival dojo, who had entered with arrogance and certainty, now stood at the edges, humbled. They shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast. One of them muttered under his breath, a mixture of disbelief and respect, He's showing us what real power means. Not in winning, not in force, but in being completely aware, completely present." Bruce's movements were deliberate, almost meditative. A slight adjustment of stance here, a flick of the wrist there, each gesture reinforcing the lesson he had delivered with motion, speed, and precision. The students began to mirror him instinctively, feeling the rhythm of Jeet Kune Do flow through their own bodies. Every pivot, every shift, every fluid motion carried the invisible signature of his philosophy. Power, discipline, and adaptability fused together seamlessly. If you're learning something from this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Every share keeps the spirit of mastery alive for everyone watching around the world. Globe showing Europe Africa, this isn't just a lesson in martial arts. It's a lesson in awareness, discipline, and the quiet, unstoppable force that comes from mastering yourself. Bruce lowered his hands slowly, letting the stillness of the room absorb the impact of his words. A hush lingered, punctuated only by the occasional exhale of a student or the subtle scrape of a foot against the wooden floor. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Awe had become understanding, astonishment had become inspiration. Students no longer focused merely on the physical techniques but on the deeper principles underlying each movement. One senior student, who had trained for decades and prided himself on his mastery, finally found his voice. "I've studied countless styles," he said quietly, "but I've never seen anyone teach with so little force and so much impact. This is what martial arts should be." Even the rival fighters, humbled but inspired, began to see the lesson in Bruce's demonstration. One stepped forward, tentative yet eager, and asked, How do we reach this level? Bruce's response was simple, almost enigmatic, a small nod, a glance that said more than words ever could. The implication was clear. Mastery begins with discipline, awareness, and the willingness to absorb what is useful while discarding the rest. The students recorded every moment, replaying it in their minds, storing it as both memory and philosophy. They knew they had witnessed more than combat skills. They had witnessed a living embodiment of Jeet Kune Do, a master not just of the body, but of mind, presence, and principle. As Bruce's eyes met theirs one last time, it was clear that this was more than a demonstration. It was a revelation. Every student understood that the path forward would be shaped not by brute strength, but by awareness, discipline, and the courage to flow with the moment, a lesson that would remain with them long after the dojo emptied. The dojo had quieted into a reverent calm, the kind of silence that follows a storm of revelation. The rival dojo's fighters, who had entered full of confidence and competitive bravado, now stood together at the edge of the circle. One by one, they bowed deeply, not just in deference to Bruce Lee's skill, but in recognition of the lesson he had imparted, a lesson far deeper than martial technique. There was no humiliation in their gestures, only respect, and a newfound understanding that true mastery transcended rivalry. Bruce remained composed, his expression serene. He did not gloat. He did not boast. There was no prideful display, no moment of superiority. Instead, he moved among his students, walking slowly across the polished wooden floor, his eyes scanning each individual. Here a wrist needed slight adjustment, there a stance needed a subtle shift. Every touch, every correction was deliberate yet gentle, guiding rather than commanding, teaching rather than imposing. A student, still shaking from the intensity of the earlier demonstration, stood frozen in place, trying to mirror Bruce's fluid motion. Bruce approached, lightly placing a hand on the young fighter's shoulder. "Relax your stance," he said softly. "Let the force flow through you, not against you. Feel, don't fight. Observe, don't react blindly." The student followed, and in that single moment, the tension in his body melted, replaced by awareness. Across the room, another student wiped sweat from his brow, eyes wide. "I thought strength was in the punch," he whispered to a nearby friend. "I see now. It's in the mind, in the heart, in every movement." Tears glimmered on his cheeks, unashamed, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Bruce nodded in quiet acknowledgement, his gaze acknowledging the awakening of understanding. The dojo, once a place of ordinary practice, had transformed into a crucible where potential was forged, shaped not by force, but by clarity and intention. Bruce's students began to move in sync with his philosophy, practicing with renewed focus. Their movements flowed naturally, effortlessly connecting defense and offense, body and mind. The air was alive with energy, not chaotic or loud, but controlled, harmonious, and powerful. Each punch, each kick, each pivot became an extension of thought and intention, rather than brute force. The lesson of Jeet Kune Do, absorb what is useful, discard what is not, and add what is uniquely your own, had finally taken root. Even the rival dojo fighters, humbled by the experience, began to mirror the fluidity Bruce had demonstrated. The rigid patterns they had clung to for years seemed clumsy now, replaced by an understanding that adaptability was the key to mastery. One of them whispered, "All this time, we trained to overpower, but he teaches us to understand. This is enlightenment." Bruce moved back to the center of the room, hands lightly resting at his sides. He observed quietly as the students practiced, each strike now purposeful, each motion precise. The moment of power explosion, the incredible speed, the devastating precision, had not been about proving superiority. It had been about awakening something far more important, the potential within each person to move with awareness, to act with intention, and to respect the power that resides in both mind and body. A young fighter approached him hesitantly, eyes glistening. "Master, I think I finally understand," he said, voice trembling. "Strength isn't just in the fist. It's in knowing yourself, in observing, in adapting, in being present. That's the power you were showing us." Bruce's lips curved into a subtle smile. "Exactly," he said quietly. "Fists and kicks are tools. Awareness, discipline, and flow are the true weapons. Mastery is not about dominance over others, but mastery over oneself." The students felt it in their very bones. The tension and ego that had filled the room moments earlier had dissolved. Each movement now carried intention, each step carried mindfulness. Even the rival dojo members had begun to grasp it, slowly integrating this fluid philosophy into their own practice. The dojo, once just a place of sweat and exertion, had become a sanctuary of transformation. Bruce Lee had not merely demonstrated skill, he had ignited a spark in every student, a recognition of the deeper power that lay within. It was quiet, invisible to the untrained eye, but profound, the kind of power that changes lives, shapes character, and awakens potential. And as Bruce stepped back, letting the students continue their practice, the realization settled over the room like a tangible presence. The moment of power explosion was not in breaking wooden dummies or defeating opponents. It was in the awakening of the mind, the deepening of understanding, and the respect for the art that each student carried forward. The dojo had been transformed, and the seeds of mastery had been sown in every heart. Bruce Lee looked around one last time, his gaze soft but unwavering, and the students understood. They had not just learned a style, they had glimpsed the essence of power itself. And that power, silent yet unstoppable, would live in them forever. Bruce Lee paused at the center of the dojo, the soft light from the high windows casting long shadows across the polished floor. Every student was quiet, their eyes fixed on him, breath steadying after the intensity of the lessons they had just witnessed. There was a stillness in the air, almost sacred, as if time itself had slowed to honor the moment. "Remember this," Bruce said, his voice calm but resonant, carrying weight beyond the volume. "Martial arts is not just a skill. It's a way of life. Respect, discipline, and adaptability are your true weapons. Power without wisdom is nothing." The words seemed simple, yet they resonated deeply, echoing in the minds and hearts of every person in the room. Each student, from the youngest beginner to the most seasoned fighter, felt their meaning sink in. They realized that the countless hours of practice, the sweat, the pain, and the struggle were not just about mastering punches and kicks, they were about mastering themselves, their awareness and their presence. A hush followed, not from fear, but from understanding. The dojo had transformed from a place of ordinary practice into a sanctuary of revelation. Bruce had shown them that mastery was not about brute force or winning competitions. It was about flow, control, humility, and the courage to face oneself honestly. One student, tears glistening in his eyes, whispered, "I see it now. Strength isn't just in the body. It's in the mind, in the heart, in every movement." Heads nodded in silent agreement. Every observer felt a shift, something intangible yet undeniable. The energy of learning, respect, and inspiration filled the room like an invisible current. Bruce moved slowly toward the exit, each step deliberate, measured, and silent. He didn't look back, yet his presence remained, lingering in the dojo like a lesson written in the air. The students stayed where they were, still absorbing the moment, changed forever. They realized that what they had witnessed was more than martial arts mastery. It was a philosophy of life, a guide to how to move, act, and respond with awareness, integrity, and respect. The rival dojo members, humbled and inspired, quietly acknowledged him with bows. Even they had learned the deeper lesson. True power is not in dominance over others but in understanding, self-discipline, and adaptability. Their earlier arrogance had melted away, replaced by a quiet determination to grow, to observe, and to integrate the wisdom they had witnessed. Bruce's teachings extended beyond the physical. Every strike, every pivot, every moment of fluid motion had carried a deeper lesson, that life itself demands adaptability, respect, and the courage to remain centered in the face of challenge. His philosophy, embodied through Jeet Kune Do, was a call to every student to cultivate both strength and wisdom, to master themselves before seeking to master the world. If you feel inspired by Bruce's philosophy, don't just keep it to yourself. Type Jeet Kune Do in the comments, hit like, and don't forget to subscribe. Share this story with anyone who wants to learn that true strength begins inside. Martial arts uniform fire. Every click, every comment, every share spreads the lesson further, keeping the spirit of mastery alive for students, fighters, and dreamers around the world. As Bruce disappeared quietly through the dojo doors, the silence remained, heavier than before, but full of potential. Every student, from that day onward, carried with them the invisible imprint of the lesson, that real power is silent, enduring, and rooted in respect, discipline, and adaptability. The dojo had been a stage for demonstration, but the real story would unfold in every movement, every decision, and every moment where a student chose awareness over force. The echoes of his presence lingered like a whisper in the wind. The splintered wooden dummies, the faint marks on the floor, the sweat-stained uniforms, all reminders of the day when mastery had revealed itself not as a display of strength, but as an awakening of potential. And in that quiet, a single truth remained: power without wisdom is nothing, and true strength always begins from within. Bruce Lee had left the dojo, but the lesson remained, alive in every heartbeat, every movement, and every mind ready to listen.